right now. What's that? 911, please. I need emergency to the Walmart, 1431, 183. My friend is in her car, and she's I don't know, I think she's passed out. Totally red. We're right by the Little Caesars.
The details of a 2009 Cedar Park murder case will be heard again this week in a Williamson County courtroom.
The primary concern after our investigation was moving forward was that many things were just not adding up.
For a third day, Sergeant Bond, who investigated Jessica Kaler's murder, testified he had a list of concerns after his first interview with Crispin Harmel. In a follow-up video interview, Harmel said Kaler drove them back to the shopping center near Walmart after they had consensual sex. But Bond said that didn't make sense.
The seat itself was pushed all the way back on the rails, and her feet could not touch the gas and brake.
Welcome to the channel. But before we dive in, hey friends, if you enjoy this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give it a like. Also, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from and what time it is over there. I'm really curious to see where my audience is tuning in from. Alright, let's get started. So, this story kicks off in Austin, the capital of Texas and one of the liveliest cities in the US, known for its totally unique vibe, live music scene, and creative culture. The city's famous motto, "Keep Austin Weird," really shows how much locals value individuality, art, and small businesses. For tourists, Austin is packed with things to do and see. If you love music, you've got to check out the local clubs on 6th Street, where there's live music every single night, from blues to rock and roll. The city's also home to the huge South by Southwest Festival, or SXSW, which mixes music, film, and digital tech, plus the Austin City Limits Festival, which is a massive music event. Nature lovers and outdoor enthusiasts will find plenty to explore too. Lady Bird Lake and the Colorado River are perfect for kayaking, boating, or just taking a stroll along the scenic waterfront. Zilker Botanical Garden and Zilker Metropolitan Park are great spots for picnics, bike rides, or just chilling outdoors. And for the brave ones, there's the Lady Bird Lake Bridge, where every summer thousands of Mexican bats take flight in this amazing, one-of-a-kind spectacle. Now, this is where 7-year-old Jessica Kaler comes in. She lived right in this city. After finishing up at Texas State University, her life was super full, juggling 2 jobs, grad school, and an active social life. She worked at a local grocery store and also as a substitute teacher, hoping to land a permanent position at an elementary school soon. On top of that, Jessica was saving money for grad school and to pay off her student loans. Yeah, she had a lot on her plate and definitely dealt with stress, but she always stayed optimistic. She was confident that it was just temporary. Her family remembered that she once wrote something like, "One day, everything will fall into place. Laugh at the chaos. Smile through the tears. And always remind yourself that everything happens for a reason. Mindful, driven, and full of life." Jessica was in a really good place and had tons of plans for the future. On Labor Day, September 7th, 2009, Jessica spent the day hanging out with her cousin and best friend, Melanie, along with a few close friends. The sun was blazing, and the air was thick with summer heat and the smell of barbecue. To cool off, they spent a few hours in the pool, laughing, diving, and chatting about everyday stuff, just soaking up the easy, carefree vibe of a summer day. After a long, relaxing time by the water, they headed to a restaurant to grab some food and take a little break from the scorching sun. The next day, Jessica had work, so she was careful about drinking too much. She even offered to give everyone a ride home to save money and look out for her friends, which meant she barely had more than a couple of drinks herself. Her mind was focused on her shift the next morning, and on things she had to get done at home like checking on the dogs and picking up some dog food. After the restaurant closed, the group went to a bar to play some pool. The place was buzzing balls, clacking on tables, laughter, music. It was this perfect mix of chaos and fun that comes with a night out. A little after midnight, they left the bar, and Jessica took on the job of driving everyone home. The streets were quiet, with just a few streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement, and the night air felt calm, but also carried this strange, hard-to-explain sense of unease. Around 1:30 in the morning, Melanie, who was sitting in the back seat, gently tried to convince Jessica to spend the night at her place. "Maybe you should just stay at my place tonight?" Jessica politely declined. She insisted she wanted to be fresh and ready for her morning shift, and that she still had a few important things to take care of at home, checking on the pets and picking up dog food. They hugged goodbye, a warm but quiet embrace, sensing that the night was far from over. After that, Jessica headed to the local Walmart, her silhouette slowly disappearing into the darkness. The next morning, as the city started to wake up and people rushed off to work, Melanie got a call from one of Jessica's co-workers. The news was alarming. Jessica hadn't shown up for her shift. Panic started creeping in. Jessica never missed work without a really good reason, and this was completely out of character. Melanie started calling other friends, and each call confirmed her fears. No one had seen Jessica since the night before, and everyone had this sinking feeling that something was seriously wrong. Jessica lived in an apartment with Melanie's brother, John, who was a police officer. When his shift started at 5:30 in the morning, he didn't see Jessica at home and didn't hear anything suspicious. He just assumed she was still asleep and they hadn't crossed paths. But even before leaving, he noticed that one of the dogs was acting strangely. The animal was restless, pacing the apartment, and it gave him this gut feeling that Jessica hadn't even come back home the day before. These little details might have seemed minor at first, but for John, they were the first warning signs that a day that had started out normal was taking a dark and worrying turn. John called his colleagues at work to report Melanie's sister missing. His voice was tense, heavy with worry, because he felt like every single minute could be critical. His co-workers immediately started tracking Jessica's phone. The signal showed her device near the intersection of US Highway 183 and Walton Way in Cedar Park. This wasn't some remote, deserted area. There was life buzzing all around. Businesses, open cafes, cars, and people moving along the streets and sidewalks. At first glance, it could have been easy to assume her car had broken down or her phone had just died, but the feeling of dread didn't leave John or Melanie for a second. Melanie and her boyfriend, Sir, rushed straight to the location of the signal. From a distance, they spotted a familiar white Kia, parked neatly near Little Caesars. The car looked like it was just sitting there, but there was something off about the atmosphere, something in the quiet around it that felt wrong. The moment they stepped out of the car, a sharp, horrible smell hit them from inside the vehicle, even though the windows were tightly shut. The temperature outside was already hitting 90 degrees, and the heat made the smell almost unbearable. Melanie's heart sank. Jessica was inside. She was slumped in the driver's seat, hunched over unnaturally, almost like a statue frozen in pain. The seat was pushed back farther than necessary, like someone had tried to find any tiny bit of comfort in impossible conditions. She wasn't moving, showing no sign of life. Melanie and Sir noticed there were traces of feces inside the car, which made the scene even more horrifying and gut-wrenching. The car wasn't locked, and as soon as they opened the door, the smell intensified, wrapping around them with a mix of silence and muted chaos. Melanie gently touched Jessica's head, trying to wake her, whispering her name, but there was no response. Jessica's body was bright red from sunburn, her skin glistening with sweat, and there were clear signs of injury all over, small scratches, scrapes, and bruises that gave the scene a sense of violent neglect, even without words. Her hair was plastered to her face and neck from sweat, and the hot, suffocating air inside the car made the helplessness of the situation even more intense. Melanie felt her chest tighten. This was the moment fear and shock collided into an unstoppable wave of panic. Sarah called 911.
Hello?
Cedar Park 911, what's happening?
911, please. I need emergency to the Walmart, 1431, 183. My friend is in her car, and she's I don't know, I think she passed out. Totally red. We're right by the Little Caesars.
Jessica Kaler had been brutally murdered. There was a clear mark on her neck from strangulation, and her eyes, face, and neck were covered in multiple small bruises, showing extreme pressure and a struggle. Her body was covered in bruises and scratches, some tiny and shallow, others deeper, the kind left behind when someone fights back. She had been raped and strangled twice. Once, likely with some kind of fabric, maybe the belt from the dress she wore over her swimsuit, and a second time by the attacker's hands. The marks on her neck showed that Jessica had clawed at her assailant, leaving numerous scratches from her own nails. Her wallet, credit cards, and car keys were missing, though her phone had been left behind for investigators to check for fingerprints and possible evidence. The place where she was found was busy and crowded, so the police immediately launched a careful investigation, starting with nearby restaurants and stores. One restaurant worker said she had come in early that morning and had seen Jessica alive. She recalled Jessica crawling inside the car, almost naked, trying to put her swimsuit back on, looking confused and disoriented. Later, wearing a white dress, Jessica was sitting by the car, playing with her hair, her movements inconsistent and strange. The last time this worker saw her inside the car, Jessica was talking to herself, making odd hand gestures, as if trying to communicate with someone invisible or fight off some inner fear. Several other witnesses also saw Jessica and described her behavior as odd, bewildered, and sluggish. No one approached her, but her movements and reactions seemed unnatural, unpredictable, like she was struggling to balance panic and exhaustion. The next time she was seen, Jessica was already dead the moment when fear turned into irreversible tragedy. Melanie, who had left Jessica just a few hours earlier, insisted that Jessica had been completely sober and hadn't taken any drugs. Toxicology confirmed this. There were no traces of alcohol, drugs, or medications in her system that could have affected her behavior. The situation was getting stranger and more confusing. Jessica's behavior, wandering, and inappropriate actions in public, combined with the complete absence of alcohol or drugs, presented investigators with a difficult task: to figure out what could have caused such bizarre and terrifying events, which ended in her brutal death. In the trunk of the car, there was a large bag of dog food. Melanie told the police that Jessica had planned to buy it earlier that morning, so it was clear the purchase had already been made. Right next to where everything happened, there was a 24-hour Walmart, and that's exactly where Jessica went after leaving Melanie. Surveillance cameras caught her arriving at the store around 1:45 in the morning. She was walking alone, wearing a white dress and a red baseball cap, her bag slung over her shoulder, and her steps were calm and confident. Inside the store, Jessica moved completely normally, no weird or unsteady movements, no stumbling, and she didn't speak to anyone. She walked past the aisles, stopped at the dog food, grabbed what she needed, and headed straight to the checkout. She paid and walked out. Everything looked completely ordinary, almost innocent. The staff barely even noticed, at least, until a certain moment. Right by the exit, things suddenly changed. One of the employees was standing by the doors, watching Jessica, and out of nowhere, a tall man in a brown shirt and baseball cap appeared to start following her. He'd only arrived at Walmart a few minutes earlier, parked a small pickup, and his presence immediately felt dangerously intrusive. From Jessica's car to his truck, there were only a few steps. He went into the restroom inside Walmart, and when he came out, Jessica was right in front of him, carrying a large bag of dog food over her shoulder. Every step she took seemed normal and calm, but he was watching, and his intentions would only become clear when it was far too late. As Jessica made her way back to her Kia, he lagged behind by about 20 seconds, but soon his pace quickened, creating a growing sense of imminent danger. Unfortunately, her car was parked directly behind a large tree that completely blocked it from the cameras, and the only other camera that could have captured it was low quality, making it impossible to see details. But even these limited shots were enough to show that the man went straight to her car. He disappeared from the frame, while his pickup stayed parked. About 2 minutes after Jessica and the man reached her car, the Kia started moving toward the exits. The scene was terrifying. The ordinary night drive had turned into something dark and almost ungraspable. Walmart's indoor cameras also recorded Jessica's car parked by Little Caesars. They tracked a person getting out of the car, walking across the lot toward Walmart, which only heightened the feeling that something extremely dangerous and unpredictable was happening. Investigators could now confidently identify him as the same man from earlier that morning. He got back into his pickup and drove away from the scene. At 5:20 in the morning, roughly 20 minutes after Jessica's car had been parked by Little Caesars, her bank card was used at an Exxon gas station. Analysis of surveillance footage and the suspect's movements showed that it was the same man who had been seen near Walmart earlier that night. Jessica hadn't left her car. She stayed there from 2:50 in the morning until the moment her body was found. But because several employees had seen her alive during that time, investigators could confidently say she had been alive for at least a few hours after leaving Walmart. The situation was becoming increasingly baffling and unsettling for detectives. They released some of the surveillance footage and announced a search for a red pickup, which only heightened tension in the community. Everyone was waiting for a call, any piece of information that could shed light on what had happened next. While the police continued their search, Jessica's funeral took place. Her family, confronted with grief, learned for the first time the horrific details. The marks on her neck showed she had been strangled. The news made an already devastating day even more painful and indescribably tragic. In their minds, only one question kept echoing: who could do this and why? To the detective's surprise, a woman named Leslie stepped into the case. Her fiancé was best friends with the man she believed owned the truck, 37-year-old Crispin Harrell. A few hours before Jessica's body was found, Leslie remembered that Crispin was supposed to come to their apartment to pay some money he owed, but he never showed up. It felt strange and unsettling to her, an uneasy premonition she couldn't shake. Eventually, she decided to call the police, despite feeling conflicted about it personally. Crispin was like family, and making that call was hard, Leslie admitted. But at the same time, a young woman lost her life. That couldn't be ignored. Leslie and her fiancé checked his records and discovered he'd been pulled over by police just 3 weeks earlier for expired registration. Officers confirmed with body cameras that he was driving the same pickup and even wearing the same baseball cap. This was the final confirmation of who they were looking for. 5 days after Jessica's body was discovered, police knocked on Crispin's door for questioning. He appeared calm, seemingly prepared for the visit. It was clear he had altered the truck's appearance. Parts that had been silver were now painted black. Crispin showed no signs of surprise or panic when detectives arrived. He admitted knowing Jessica, and claimed he had arranged to meet her through a website called lonelyhousewifehookups.com. His words hung over the interrogation room like a weight, adding to the cold tension and heavy suspicion the detectives felt. They had been messaging each other on Messenger and supposedly arranged to meet at Walmart between 12:30 and 1 in the morning the same night Jessica was killed. Crispin claimed that he and Jessica drove around in her car and had sex near a park. He was in her vehicle and could have been one of the last people to see her alive, but that didn't automatically make him the killer. He told police he had nothing to hide, but the investigators already had surveillance footage, showing a very different story, one that was contradictory and undeniable. Crispin and Jessica didn't arrive at Walmart until well after 1 in the morning. They didn't interact at all and didn't even notice each other until he got into her car. Jessica's behavior at that time made it clear she had no intention of meeting anyone she was there solely for dog food. It was obvious there was no personal or romantic relationship between them, and his story instantly began to collapse under the weight of the evidence. Later, he claimed that Jessica had driven him back to Walmart, and they allegedly talked a bit in her car. Crispin said he opened up about his financial problems, explaining his struggles with gas money, and that Jessica supposedly offered her debit card, writing the PIN on his hand. The next day, when he learned of her death, he allegedly thought, "I was with this girl, and she's dead. Weird that this happened." Panic, he said, made him throw away the card and change the appearance of his truck, trying to hide any connection. He told all this with such confidence that it almost seemed believable at first glance, but investigators knew his story was the most tangled part of the case. Melanie and her friends confirmed that Jessica had never mentioned meeting anyone that night. She was an extremely open person, always sharing her plans and letting people know where she was going and who she was with. If she had really planned to meet a stranger so late at night, she would have definitely told her family or friends, and everyone would have known. A detailed analysis of their computers and phones confirmed that Crispin and Jessica had never exchanged messages, and Jessica had never visited the website he mentioned. It was clear that just hours after her body was found, he was searching her name online, looking at pictures, and reading articles about her. These actions were obsessive, highlighting his panic and attempts to cover up any involvement, making his story even more suspicious and opaque to investigators. Police concluded that Crispin had been watching Jessica outside, forced her into his car, drove to the park, where he raped and strangled her twice. He then returned the car to the parking lot, leaving Jessica nearly dead, and stole her bank card. When detectives mentioned the surveillance footage, Crispin immediately asked for a lawyer and went silent, as if realizing the gravity of the situation. By this point, the police were certain he was Jessica's killer, but they still couldn't pinpoint exactly what happened between the moment he left her car and when she was found dead. No one else approached the vehicle, and Jessica couldn't have caused the events that followed on her own. Even after Crispin left, Jessica remained alive for a long period, completely helpless. For investigators, it was a scene of total chaos and confusion. At that point, they didn't yet have enough evidence to charge him with murder, but there was plenty to charge him with tampering with evidence. In May 2010, after pleading guilty, Crispin was sentenced to 10 years in prison for that crime. Authorities continued investigating Jessica's murder, going over every piece of evidence again and again, and finally, they came across something that began to explain the hours of baffling behavior from the young woman. Detectives read an intriguing article from a professor at Indiana University's medical school about people who were strangled but didn't die immediately, sometimes succumbing only hours later. It explained that death wasn't instantaneous. In fact, the process could stretch out for hours, a phenomenon known as delayed death by strangulation. Experts noted that this fully explained Jessica's bizarre behavior outside her car, as well as the presence of feces inside the vehicle. Her brain had been so damaged by the two strangulations that she couldn't understand what was happening, where she was, call for help, or even use her phone. On top of that, she suffered heat stroke from being out in the scorching sun, trapping her in a completely lethal situation. Forensic pathologist Dr. Bill Smoke explained, "You first lose consciousness because the brain isn't getting enough oxygen-rich blood. Then seizures may occur, and within at least 15 seconds, brain cells start dying. The first thing you lose control of is your bladder, then your anal sphincter. The last part of the brain to die is the brainstem. It controls breathing and heartbeat. Above the brainstem are the functions tied to personality, memory, and self-awareness, and these gradually shut down during this horrific process." This discovery helped investigators understand why Jessica could remain in that state for hours after the attack, wandering, behaving strangely, and being completely helpless before death finally occurred. It was clear that Crispin had strangled her twice, thinking she was already dead, but in reality, she had only been unconscious. Realizing his intent to kill, and armed with this scientific evidence, authorities officially charged him with first-degree murder in May 2013. He pleaded not guilty.
An expert on strangulation testified in a Williamson County murder trial today. The doctor testified that he agrees with the medical examiner's findings that Jessica Kaler died as a result of strangulation. Crispin Harmel is accused of killing the 27-year-old. Witnesses saw Kaler alive hours after she was strangled in her hot car, acting strangely. Dr. Bill Smock says it's because she was attacked.
So in this case, I think we have two explanations as to why Jessica's behavior was abnormal. One, brain damage from strangulation, and number two, heat.
The defense cross-examined Dr. Smock using his own testimony, saying if someone was strangled, their reaction would be to dig their nails into the attacker, which would likely collect the attacker's DNA under their fingernails. There's no DNA linking Kaler and Harmel.
The defense tried to challenge Dr. Smoke's testimony, arguing that if someone had been attacked, their natural reaction would be to dig their nails into the attacker, potentially leaving DNA under their fingernails. But unfortunately for them, no DNA linking Jessica Kaler and Crispin Harmel could be found. This became a key point for the defense, who leaned on the absence of direct physical evidence to argue that the case was weak. The lawyers believed their position was strong after all. There was no trace of Crispin's DNA on the victim's body. But the circumstances of that day were extreme. The heat and humidity could have quickly destroyed any DNA, which explained why there was no physical evidence on Jessica's body. Temperatures had soared past 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and hours under the scorching sun created an environment where biological traces simply couldn't survive. Prosecutors, however, weren't worried. They relied on a mountain of surveillance footage showing Jessica's movements and Crispin's presence near her car. The volume and sequence of the evidence were compelling. There was no other person who could have done it, and Crispin's actions on the cameras lined up perfectly with the timeline of events. The state also brought in a witness who could shed more light on Crispin, his ex-girlfriend, Elizabeth Crispin. She testified that Crispin told her his apartment had burned down and that he supposedly lost his phone in the fire. In reality, the investigators had seized his phone during the investigation, and this lie suggested his attempts to cover his tracks. He also claimed his truck had broken down, even though it had also been taken by authorities. These conflicting statements cast doubt on Crispin's honesty and frustrated the court. Unfortunately, the case ended without a verdict, because prosecutors were accused of withholding evidence, which sent the trial back to square one and threw everything into uncertainty. The lead prosecutor, Yana Juti, who had worked on the case, later ended up in prison for violating publication bans and faced sanctions from the Texas State Bar for professional misconduct. Her career and life ended tragically. She was found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound several years later, adding even more grief and confusion to an already heartbreaking case.
The details of a 2009 Cedar Park murder case will be heard again this week in a Williamson County courtroom.
Crispin Harmel is being retried in the...
Crispin's second trial kicked off nearly 10 years after Jessica's murder.
Williamson County jury watched a 2009 suspect interrogation in a murder trial out of Cedar Park today.
The jury watched the second interview Cedar Park police had with Harmel after they say they found holes in his story. KXAN's Lauren Kravitz has more.
The primary concern after our investigation was moving forward was that many things were just not adding up.
For a third day, Sergeant Bond, who investigated Jessica Kaler's murder, testified he had a list of concerns after his first interview with Crispin Harmel. In a follow-up video interview, Harmel said Kaler drove them back to the shopping center near Walmart after they had consensual sex. But Bond said that didn't make sense.
The seat itself was pushed all the way back on the rails, and her feet could not touch the gas and brakes.
Harmel also said Kaler started up her car as he was walking back to his truck. But surveillance video never shows the lights turn on or Kaler's car leave. In fact, Kaler's car keys were not in the car and never found. Harmel also said Kaler lent him her debit card to get gas, but he threw it away once he saw police were looking for him.
Generally speaking, when people either change something or get rid of something, it's because they don't want it to be located in or on their person, which means they want to disassociate with that particular item.
And that was Lauren Kravitz reporting. The defense started to cross-examine Sergeant Bond late this afternoon. One of the things that they argued was that neither Harmel nor Kaler would have looked for each other inside Walmart because the plan was to meet at her car. Prosecutors argued that neither of them were looking for each other at the time that Harmel said they were supposed to meet.
In other news tonight, a jury found a man guilty of killing a woman in Cedar Park in 2009. Crispin Harmel is convicted of kidnapping, raping, and strangling her. The judge sentenced Harmel to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Fortunately, this time the jury reached a clear verdict and found Crispin Harmel guilty of capital murder. The evidence and the logic of the investigation left no room for doubt, and despite multiple attempts by the defense to challenge the circumstances, the truth prevailed. Since the prosecutors didn't seek the death penalty, the court automatically sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In 2020, Crispin filed an appeal, but the ruling stood. He continues serving his sentence, while Jessica's family lives with the pain and grief of a loss that changed their lives forever. That night, Jessica had such a wonderful time with her friends, laughing, swimming in the pool, enjoying a barbecue, and soaking in the calm of a warm September evening. And that morning, as she headed back to her car after picking up dog food, she was ready to go home, feed her pets, get some sleep, and head to work. Her master's degree was almost within reach, and there were so many plans, dreams, and moments waiting for her. All of that was cut short that fateful night. I really hoped we'd feel at least a little relief, knowing he was caught and behind bars, her cousin John said. But we didn't. Nothing changed. He's alive, and Jessica, she's not. That emptiness and pain is just going to stay with us forever. Jessica's father expressed his indescribable loss in words that broke hearts. So much was taken that day. He took away my chance to walk her down the aisle, to see her happy, to see her building her life. She would have been an amazing mother, I know that. I miss her so much, and I always will. Melanie added, like with any loss, some days are a little easier than others. But even the happiest memories now often get twisted because of what you saw in that parking lot that morning. No day will ever feel whole again. All those little moments that were supposed to be simple and joyful are now overshadowed by pain and the memory of loss. This case left a deep mark, a loss that can't be replaced, a tragedy that changed a family forever, and a stark reminder of how quickly happiness can turn to horror. If you want to support our channel and help us keep creating content, please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It really helps us out, and we're so grateful for it.